He was 24 years old. He was sleeping in a bunk he had won by drawing the ace of spades just hours earlier. And in less than 10 seconds, on a quiet stretch of Swedish highway, the greatest bass player heavy metal had ever produced was gone. But here is what almost nobody talks about. The official story of how Cliff Burton died falls apart the moment you actually look at it. The black ice his driver swore was on the road was not there. The temperature was above freezing. The detective on scene said the tracks looked like a man who had fallen asleep at the wheel. And the most haunting part of the whole night happened after Cliff was already pinned beneath a 40,000-pound tour bus when a rescue crane slipped, and the bus came crashing back down on him a second time. This is the story of the most influential bassist in metal history. The kid from Castro Valley who practiced 8 hours a day in his bedroom because he had made a promise to a dead brother. The man Metallica's own producer said was the real leader of the band, and the strange, contested, almost unbelievable final hours of his life. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you will never hear For Whom the Bell Tolls the same way again. Number 12. The Promise to a Ghost. Long before he was thrash metal royalty, Cliff Burton was a quiet kid from a quiet California town who liked classical music and books. His father, Ray, was an assistant highway engineer. His mother, Jan, taught children with disabilities. He had 2 older siblings, Connie and Scott. By all accounts, Cliff was introverted, gentle, and almost shy. The kind of boy who would rather disappear into a record than into a crowd. Then, in May of 1975, when Cliff was just 13, his 16-year-old brother Scott collapsed from a brain aneurysm and died. The family never fully recovered. Cliff barely talked about it, but 3 or 4 months after the funeral, he walked into the kitchen and told his parents he wanted to learn the bass. He told a few close friends something even more chilling. He said, quote, "I'm gonna be the best bassist for my brother." That sentence would become the engine of everything that followed. Every hour of practice, every sacrifice weekend, every show, every album. It was all for a teenage boy who never got to grow up. And if you think that sounds like a movie, just wait. Because the way Cliff threw himself into that promise was so extreme, it scared the people closest to him. Number 11. The bedroom practice room. Cliff didn't pick up the bass casually, he attacked it. His sister Connie later said that if you wanted to talk to him, you had to walk into his bedroom because he refused to come out. He would emerge for meals carrying his bass and walk straight back in to keep playing. 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day, even after he was already in Metallica, even after they were touring the world, he kept that schedule. His teacher Steve Doherty was a serious jazz player who pushed him to read music, study classical composers, and break the rules of what bass was supposed to do. There is a small, almost unbelievable detail from his childhood that ended up shaping his entire sound. As a kid, Cliff was hunting and fishing in the California outdoors when he tried to clean a carp with a knife and accidentally severed a tendon in his right pinky finger. That injury changed how he attacked the strings. He couldn't play like everyone else, so he played like nobody else. The ferocious finger-only assault that would later make Metallica fans lose their minds was born from a fishing accident, and his bandmates would later joke about a technique they called the floppy finger. But there's something even stranger about who Cliff was off stage. Number 10, the cowboy hat kid nobody understood. In a high school full of punks, jocks, and stoners, Cliff Burton wore a black cowboy hat, bell-bottom jeans, and a denim jacket. He drove a beat-up green Volkswagen Beetle that he nicknamed the Grasshopper. He listened to country, classical, jazz, blues, southern rock, and Black Sabbath in the same afternoon. People made fun of him for the way he dressed. He didn't care. Friends remember him as the kid who refused to belong to any one tribe. He read. He studied music theory deeper than most college students. He was obsessed with Stanley Clarke and Geddy Lee and Phil Lynott. He worshipped Geezer Butler. He thought Lemmy was a god. And while every other metal kid in 1979 was trying to dress like Judas Priest, Cliff was rolling around Castro Valley dressed like a hippie cowboy who had wandered out of a 1972 photograph. That refusal to follow the rules of cool was the same thing that made his playing so revolutionary. He didn't care what a bass was supposed to sound like. And by the time he was 16, he was already in his first real band, with a name you would not believe. Number 9. The band named after a strip club. Cliff's first band was called Easy Street, and yes, the name was lifted from a topless bar in the Bay Area. The lineup was insane in hindsight. On guitar was a kid named Jim Martin, who would later become the iconic guitarist of Faith No More. On drums was Mike Borden, who would also end up in Faith No More and later behind Ozzy Osbourne. 3 teenagers in a garage who would each go on to permanently mark heavy music. After Easy Street, Cliff and Jim Martin moved on to a second band with an even weirder name, Agents of Misfortune. They entered the Hayward Area Battle of the Bands contest in 1981, and the audition video survived. If you have ever seen it, you already know what's coming. Because in that grainy footage of 3 suburban kids in a Battle of the Bands tryout, you can clearly hear 2 pieces of music that would go on to become legend. The chromatic intro to For Whom the Bell Tolls, and the bass solo that the world would later know as Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth. Cliff Burton wrote those passages before Metallica even existed, before he had ever met James Hetfield. He was already inventing the future, alone in a junior college rehearsal space. But the moment that would actually change everything happened the next year. In a sweaty club in Los Angeles, on a night 2 scruffy unknowns happened to be in the audience. Number 8. The night Metallica saw him. In 1982, Cliff joined a Bay Area band called Trauma. Trauma got booked at the Whisky A Go-Go in Los Angeles, the same legendary stage that had launched The Doors. 2 members of a struggling local thrash band were in the crowd that night, James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich. They were not there for Cliff. They were not there for Trauma. But the second Cliff started his solo, both of them froze. Hetfield later described it as, quote, "this amazing shredding." For a few seconds, they thought they were watching an unknown guitar prodigy. Then they realized the sound was coming from the bass. They didn't even talk about it. They just looked at each other. And from that moment, they were going to do whatever it took to get him in their band. Their own bassist, Ron McGovney, was already on his way out. They went backstage, they pitched Cliff, and they offered him the gig. But Cliff had a condition that nearly killed the deal, a demand most struggling rock bands would have laughed at. He told them he would only join if Metallica left Los Angeles entirely. Number 7. The demand that moved a band. Cliff hated Los Angeles. He thought the LA scene was full of pretty boys playing dress-up. He didn't want to live there. He didn't want to drive there. He wasn't even sure he wanted to play music there. So he told Hetfield and Ulrich the truth. If you want me, you move to the Bay Area, where I live. And these 2 future metal titans, who at that point had nothing but a demo tape and a dream, said yes without hesitating. Metallica packed up and relocated to El Cerrito, California, just across the bay from San Francisco. That single decision rewrote rock history, because the Bay Area scene was rawer, faster, hungrier, and meaner than anything happening in Hollywood at the time. Metallica didn't just gain a bassist, they became a Bay Area band. They absorbed the speed, the aggression, the underground ethos of that scene. And every band that followed, from Megadeth to Exodus to Testament, owes part of their DNA to a teenager who refused to drive south on the I-5. But Cliff's fingerprints on Metallica went so much deeper than just geography. He literally named one of the most important albums in metal history, almost by accident. Number 6, how he named Kill 'Em All. Their first album was originally going to be called Metal Up Your Ass. The cover was already designed. It featured a hand holding a dagger emerging from a toilet bowl. The label refused to release it. Distributors said retailers would never stock something that crude. The band was furious. They sat in a room arguing about what to do, throwing out names, getting nowhere. And then Cliff, half joking, half exhausted, muttered, "We should just kill 'em all, man." Everyone went quiet. They looked at each other. 3 days later, the title was locked in. Kill 'Em All, released in July 1983, featuring the bass solo Anesthesia Pulling Teeth, which broke nearly every rule about what bass was allowed to do in heavy music. He used a wah pedal, on bass in 1983. It was unheard of. Bass players were supposed to be invisible. They were supposed to lock in with the drummer and never raise their head. Cliff destroyed that idea on his very first album. And on the second album, he proved it was no fluke. Number 5, the lead bass revolution. When Metallica released Ride the Lightning in July 1984, something had clearly shifted. Cliff received writing credits on 6 of the 8 tracks, 6 out of 8, as a bass player on a thrash album. Listen to the chromatic intro of For Whom the Bell Tolls. Most people who have heard that song their entire life still think it's a guitar. It isn't. It's Cliff. Heavily distorted, attacked with a wah pedal, played with the same fingers that had been mangled by a fish years before. He turned the bass into a lead instrument. He invented techniques nobody had even named yet. Then came Master of Puppets in March 1986. The album most metal fans would tell you is the greatest thrash record ever made. Cliff's instrumental Orion alone is a piece of music that belongs in a conservatory. Arpeggios, harmony lines, chord voicings, a melodic sensibility that makes the song feel more like Bach than Black Sabbath. And here is the secret that the band's longtime producer would only reveal decades later. On those records, Cliff wasn't just the bassist, he was the boss. Number 4. The true leader of Metallica. Producer Flemming Rasmussen worked with Metallica on Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. In a 2025 interview with Metal Hammer, he finally said what insiders had quietly known for 40 years. He said that Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield being seen as the leaders of the band, quote, didn't emerge until later. Back then, it was a 4-piece unit, and Cliff was the oldest, the most musically educated, the one who could read music, the one who could explain harmony. And then Rasmussen said the line that changed how everyone looks at those albums. He said, quote, nothing really happened in Metallica unless Cliff nodded yes. Think about that for a second. The band that would become the biggest metal act in human history was, in its most creatively explosive era, run by quiet consensus from a 23-year-old in a denim jacket. He was the vibe. He was the brain. He was the gravity. And he had no idea on the morning of September 26, 1986, that he had less than 24 hours left. Number 3. The Last Show and the Ace of Spades. The Damage Inc. tour was rolling through Europe behind Master of Puppets. The band was on top of the world. Their manager could feel it. The crowds were getting bigger. The reviews were unreal. Anthrax was opening for them. They had played London's Hammersmith Odeon 6 days earlier, and the after-party was so wild that nobody slept. Now they were in Stockholm, Sweden, headlining the Solnahallen Arena. The date was September 26, 1986. The final song they ever performed with Cliff on stage was Fight Fire with Fire. Nobody in the building knew it was the last one. After the show, the band climbed onto their tour bus to make the overnight drive to Copenhagen. The bunks on the bus were uncomfortable, narrow, and everyone was tired. So Cliff and Kirk Hammett did what they often did. They drew cards to decide who slept where. Cliff drew the Ace of Spades. He won the choice. He turned to Kirk and said, "I want your bunk." Kirk shrugged. He answered, "Fine, take my bunk. I'll sleep up front. It's probably better anyway." Kirk would spend the rest of his life replaying that sentence, because the bunk Kirk had been about to sleep in was the bunk directly next to a long row of windows on the side of the bus. And in less than 7 hours, those windows were about to become the most important detail of a tragedy that has never been fully explained. Number 2, the crash and the black ice that wasn't there. It was just before 7 in the morning on September 27th, 1986. The bus was rolling south on European route E4, about 12 miles north of Ljungby, near the small Swedish village of Dörarp. The band were asleep. James Hetfield was in the back lounge because his throat was sore. Cliff was up top in the bunk he had just won. Suddenly the bus began to swerve. It careened from side to side, then left the road, blipped, and rolled. Cliff, asleep in the upper bunk by the windows, was thrown straight through the glass. The bus came down on top of him. He never woke up. The driver ran from the cab in shock and told everyone the same thing. Black ice. He had hit black ice. He had lost control. James Hetfield, half-dressed and freezing, climbed out of the wreckage and walked the road in his socks and underwear looking for it. He never found any. The local detective Arne Pettersson from Ljungby told a Swedish newspaper that the tracks at the scene looked exactly like the tracks of a driver who had fallen asleep behind the wheel. A freelance photographer named Leonard Wenberg, who showed up at the crash site the next morning, said black ice was, quote, out of the question. The road was DRI. The temperature was around 36 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees above the freezing point. Police inspected the scene. They couldn't find a single patch of ice anywhere. The driver was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing. To this day, no one knows what really happened. Was he drunk? Was he asleep? Did he hit something? Was the official explanation a lie that was easier to live with? 40 years later, the surviving members of Metallica still don't have an answer. And what happened next was, somehow, even worse. Number 1. The Second Crush. The band crawled out of the wreckage one by one, alive, bleeding, terrified. They could see Cliff's legs sticking out from under the bus. Hetfield later said in an MTV interview, quote, I saw the bus lying right on him. I saw his legs sticking out. I freaked. A crane was called to lift the bus. Locals gathered. Cliff was already gone, but the band was praying for a miracle anyway, because they couldn't accept what they were seeing. The crane lowered its hook. The chain wrapped around the bus. The bus started to lift, and then the chain slipped. The bus crashed back down on top of him a second time. If anyone in the band had still been holding on to hope, it died in that instant. Hetfield went looking for the driver. He was not gentle about it. He has spoken openly about wanting to physically hurt the man, especially after he allegedly tried to pull a blanket off Cliff to use it for the survivors. Kirk Hammett, the man who had given up that bunk hours earlier, was destroyed. He later said he could remember almost nothing of the next 3 or 4 hours. What he does remember is being back at the hotel at 4 in the morning, hearing a voice in the street below his window, drunk, screaming. It was James Hetfield. Walking the empty streets of a small Swedish town in the middle of the night, sobbing, yelling, Cliff! Cliff! Where are you? Hammett broke down crying in his hotel room, and the greatest metal band in the world was never the same again. What he left behind. They didn't quit. Cliff's parents told them not to. They auditioned bassists and ended up choosing Jason Newsted from Flotsam and Jetsam. By November 1986, less than 2 months after burying their friend, Metallica was back on stage in Tokyo. Cliff's body was cremated. His ashes were scattered at the Maxwell Ranch in California. At the memorial, they played Orion, his instrumental, the one he had written. In 1988, on the album And Justice for All, they released a song called To Live Is to Die. Buried inside the track is a spoken word poem written by Cliff himself, recorded before he died. The lyrics, "Cannot the kingdom of salvation take me home," are the words his family chose to engrave on the memorial stone that now stands near the crash site in Sweden. In 2006, on the 20th anniversary of his death, that stone was officially unveiled. In 2009, Metallica was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Cliff was inducted with them posthumously. His father Ray walked on stage and accepted on his behalf. He told the audience that Cliff's mother Jan was Metallica's biggest fan. In 2011, a Rolling Stone reader poll named him the 9th greatest bassist of all time. In 2017, the world learned that Cliff's parents had been quietly donating every penny of his posthumous Metallica royalties for years. The money was going to a music scholarship at his old high school in Castro Valley, just funding kids who wanted to learn an instrument. No press, no announcement, they just did it. In 2018, the Alameda County Board of Supervisors officially declared February 10th, his birthday, Cliff Burton Day. And in May 2022, in a quiet move that would have made him laugh, the Swedish bus stop near the crash site was officially renamed Cliff Burton's Memorial Stone. a teenage promise to a dead brother, a fishing injury that birthed a sound, a refusal to move to Los Angeles that bent the entire arc of metal music, a drawn card on the wrong night, and a 40-year-old story that still doesn't add up. The strange thing about Cliff Burton's death is not just that he died young. Plenty of musicians die young. The strange thing is how completely he had already finished the work. He was 24 years old, and he had already invented an entire approach to bass guitar that didn't exist before him. He had already co-written the riffs and structures that would shape thrash metal for the next 40 years. He had already changed Metallica into Metallica. There is a school of thought that says he was on a clock he could feel. That the kid who lost his brother at 13 and instantly redirected his entire life into a musical promise had some quiet awareness that he didn't have forever. That every 6-hour practice session, every sleepless tour van, every demand that the band move closer to home was him squeezing the most out of a window he somehow knew was narrow. We will never know if that's true. What we do know is this: the bus driver was cleared, the black ice was never found, the detective said it looked like sleep at the wheel, and 40 years later, 3 of the most powerful men in rock music still flinch when his name comes up. So the next time you hear that chromatic intro to For Whom the Bell Tolls, listen closely. That's not just a bass line. That's a 13-year-old kid in a bedroom in Castro Valley, keeping a promise to his older brother, and it is still echoing all these years later, louder than ever. If this story moved you, hit that like button for Cliff. Subscribe so the algorithm keeps pulling people back to him. And tell me in the comments, do you believe the Black Ice story, or do you think Metallica has been carrying a darker truth for 40 years? I'll see you in the next one.